So the intention with all of these GPS sessions is that it's not just a one-off, that we will continue the conversation and bring some of our learnings back to the wider audience. So just to get us warmed up and to get our fingers working, you've already started doing this already, but could we do it again? Could you actually, on the chat function, let us know where you're based today? And as you join this co-created dialogue, are you here as a training provider? So that would be the letter T. Or are you here as someone who's a facilitator or tutor? That's the F. Or are you here having been a participant? That's P. Or some combination of all three on a coaching program between March 2020 and October 2021. So I'll stop sharing the slides and just see who do we have in the chat. So your location. So Stephen, for example, is sharing that he's based in Warsaw and he's been a facilitator on a virtual coaching program. Thanks, Stephen. We've got a few people talking about being participants. Thank you for that. We have Lenka from Prague. You're very welcome. He's a facilitator and a participant. We have Peter, who's been a tutor and training provider and a facilitator. Okay, I've got Jan in Prague, who was a facilitator. All right, we've got lots of different stakeholder perspective. Catherine calling in from the wonderfully named Durango in Colorado, who's played all three roles. So Catherine, great to have you on the call as well. And we've got Catherine also in Australia. Thank you for joining us, who's been a facilitator. So we want to try and take these different stakeholder positions as we explore some of the challenges and opportunities of delivering a coaching program online over the last while. And as I mentioned, I'm head of coaching programs at University College Dublin. And maybe these three pictures encapsulate where we were as a coaching team. So I'm part of a wider coaching faculty of about 7 or 8 people. And you can get a sense from the picture on the left. It's a beautiful red brick building with very leafy environment. Participants often talk about it being a bubble for them to get out of the real world and go into our program. And there's something about the grounds being really nurturing and people like to go for walks. It used to actually be a convent for nuns. I haven't seen any of those around for a while, but it's got that history of learning in it. And then the picture to the right-hand side is a picture of what our training rooms look like. And you'll see that we very much have a circle of chairs. It's very much, there's no distractions other than that, beautiful windows, but the space, and we pay a lot of attention to actually creating a safe space. So the program we came from was a very experiential, very relational focused, with a background, as you can see in the middle, of Gestalt. So that's probably our philosophy of our program. We would always do things like opening and closing rounds. We'd focus a lot on raising awareness for the participants and them raising awareness for their coachees. We'd often talk about this word contact, that being a quality of contact between coach and coachee, but also between participants. We would always encourage people to work with participants they hadn't worked with on the program so far. And nearly half of all our workshops were involving coach practice, where either you were being coached or you were coaching or you're observing coaching between the participants. And so there was a lot of contact, that sense of people really getting to know each other. It would often be referenced that people here know me more than people have known me all my life, be it family or colleagues. And so from this environment then, we, like many of us, faced a bit of a shock in March 2020 when the Irish government, like many others, announced lockdown. So as a coaching faculty in March 2020, we were presented with the challenge of how do we continue to deliver a highly experiential and relationally focused 16-day program accredited at senior practitioner and do it virtually during lockdown. We've got some dogs joining us as well, so good to have them on board. And what we ended up doing in the period between March 2020 all the way to September 2021, when things have opened up again, temporarily, fingers crossed it stays that way. We've actually delivered 3 cohorts of approximately 18 people per cohort. And we've delivered out of a possible 15 workshops, every program has 6 workshops, we've delivered 12 of those virtually, cumulatively over that time. And my curiosity is, I've got some learnings and observations, but in having this session, I want to invite us to share whether we're coming as training providers, as facilitators, or as participants. What have been some of those learnings about running a coaching program virtually? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to stop talking. You'll be glad to hear. We're going to do 2 rounds of World Cafe. So it's all about discussions and harvesting the insights. Each round, you will be presented with a question, and then I'm going to randomly put you into breakout groups of roughly 4 to 5 people for about 20 minutes to answer the question and come down to 2 key contributions you want to share from your group to the rest of the group via chat. And then we'll also make some time for some live conversation and dialogue about that question. And then we'll change the groups and do the second question. And at the end, we'll do a wrap up around what are some of the lessons learned from today's conversation that we'd like to share with the wider coaching community. So let me just stop there for a second and feel free to unmute. Is that clear to everybody? Any questions or insults or observations at this stage from anybody? Or anything I could clarify more clearly in terms of how we're going to do this? I'm going to take silence as a good thing, I guess. Thanks, Stephen, for giving me the thumbs up. Okay, so what we're going to do, let me show you the first question then I'd like you to consider. So the first question is very much based around what were the key challenges experienced in delivering coaching training completely virtually? And again, you might want to think about those different stakeholders we've identified as a provider, as a tutor or facilitator, or as a participant. I'm going to put you into a breakout group of about 4 people for 20 minutes. And again, as I asked, I'd like you to agree and share at the end, using your breakout room number, your collective top 2 contributions to this question. What I would encourage you to do, and I know I've got lots of experienced people here, but again, to remember in the breakout groups, it'd be good to appoint a facilitator. It might be nice to do some very brief introductions so we make some contact with each other. And then encouragement to make space to gather and build on the ideas before you start moving into prioritizing those 2 key contributions. And again, we would ask that we ensure all voices are heard and valued because we all bring a different perspective. If you'd like to, it might be worthwhile photographing this slide right now, just so you have a reference point that you can go back to, but hopefully it's self-explanatory. So without further ado, I am going to create the breakout rooms, and I am going to open up those now. So you should be getting an invite to ask you to join a room, and I'll give you 20 minutes to have the conversation about what were some of the key challenges experienced. And again, if you're missing any one of those stakeholders' perspectives, you might just be creative and step into their shoes and imagine what was it like from their perspective if it's not in your group. Okay, over to you folks, enjoy, and I'll jump in and join you as you go through the conversation. So opening up those rooms now for you. Welcome back, everybody, from your breakout groups. It was a real pleasure just to be able to jump in and hear some of the conversations. So what I'd love to do is, could I ask for a volunteer from each group, maybe to share on chat, if you haven't done it already, what are the top 2 challenges that your group identified in trying to deliver coach training through a virtual medium? So if we could just turn our attention to chat. And I think some groups already shared. So Neil's already mentioned time zones. I think that was a comment about working in learning or practicum groups and trying to sync up to meet each other. I think Roberto mentioned that challenge of it's late his evening and it's early morning the next day for one of his fellow practicum members. That's a challenge. And connection, I guess maybe even connection on 2 levels, connectivity of Wi-Fi was definitely a challenge for some of us, but forming that connection with each other as individuals. Neil also mentioned language. Catherine, would you like to say a bit more? You were talking a bit about the importance of language and cultural language. Would you like to say a bit more about that? That was Catherine Holt, I think, if you're still with us.
I'm still with you. I guess it's comparing my experience in different formats with people, with instructors and facilitators who have a global mindset or have some cross-cultural background, and it's the speed of how they speak, the willingness to check in with people on what's being understood or not. It's the sensitivity that some participants may be shy culturally to speak up, and then inviting them in. It's a variety of things. Oh, and including if you've got pods or subgroups of people who are more comfortable in a particular language, setting things up so that people can speak in a language that they're most comfortable in rather than assuming English by default.
Right. And there's power dynamics within that assumption, I guess, of who's native speaking of any language and who isn't. Thanks, Catherine. What else am I seeing? And please, everybody, jump in as you look at the chat if you want to ask each other more questions. I guess just going back to Neil for a second, that sense of virtual is more tiring. Neil, you were sharing in the programs you deliver. How did you deal with that challenge of, I think you went from face-to-face to virtual. How did you go about dealing with the challenge of it being?
We realized that putting a face-to-face, I mean, this is another thing that came up in the group. You can't just you just can't go straight from present face-to-face to virtual, just stick it on Zoom and it's going to work. You have to adjust. And so the adjustment that we made, we realized that people being in residential for a week, although they'd be more comfortable at home and you know, in their own conditions in their home countries, because we go from everything from east to west and everything between north and south. We go from Africa to Europe and from the Americas to the farthest of Asia. And our trainers are also from those countries. And so what we did is we created synchronous monthly sessions, which would take some of what we would have done face to face and spread it through several months then, where they get, and we just had one on Wednesday, an hour and a half or 2 hours of input and discussion and small groups, and then an hour and a half then where we do pairs where they coach and are observed, and we debrief their coaching. And they actually are amazed at the connections that they make and the authenticity of how it works. But everybody, I think, agrees that it's more tiring. I did it in Wales when I was back home in Wales in August, 10 days, and we had like a 1 day break between. But so that it wasn't all day, we spread it over 10 days. But I was just, oh my gosh. Yeah, so, those are the challenges. But you have to adjust. You have to make changes. You can't just
like for like transition.
Stick it on Zoom and it's going to work. It's not going to work.
Right. And I think, Karen, if I could jump in, and maybe your group identified the need for more breaks as well. That you want to say a bit more about that conversation or anything else, Karen, your group came up with?
Yes, we identified that for the provider and the trainer, it's good to have to buy some time because it is very, very tiring, and also having breaks for the people who are participating. It's tiring for them as well. So to give them some time to take a small break, also putting them into smaller groups. It was mentioned in the group that that's very helpful for the introverts, so that they can speak out and they can make some deeper connections. And basically it helps to get larger groups, and if they're broken into smaller groups, it helps them to engage more and learn more. It's more efficient.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Karen. Let me just number Clodagh, I see your group talked about having room for the informal. What was meant by that?
Yeah. So, the connection. So while we have the formal training that we need to build in space and time, um, to just connect with each other so that so if it's like going for the coffee, the bump conversation, and so try and bring the informal into it as well and build that in, that we can have conversations without having to have the structure and mandate of what needs to happen, so we can have our own connections.
Okay.
I was very excited by Colm, if I can mention Karen's comment on a room full of introverts. And I wonder, could we identify and create a room of introverts this evening and see what happens? Brilliant. So thank you. Thanks for this evening.
Thanks, Claudia. So I don't know if that resonates with others. It's definitely one thing I've heard a lot from people who've experienced both face-to-face and virtual was, and as a university, our big learning was so much learning happens in the informal walk to the dining room, or in, grabbing somebody and saying, hey, that what you just said there. Whereas I guess almost Zoom is too formal. And even when we sometimes allowed the Zoom room to be open and invited people just to talk to each other, it didn't feel the same. So a lot of that key kind of peer-to-peer and formal outside of the class time learning got lost is one of our experiences. I'm going to jump to a few more. Brendan, can you tell me more about your group? And again, it doesn't have to be Brendan saying it, but that group, which was Tatiana, Brendan, Catherine, and Pater. What was your thinking around teaching and assessing skills? What was the challenge there?
Actually, yeah, there was two of our contributors, Peter and Catherine, had particular skills type and intercultural and size of group issues. So it was very broad church. And then Tatiana had a very well organized, well staffed, it sounded like, delivery mechanism. That was actually catered for actually some of the things that people have mentioned, managing the energy in the group, and things like meditation, little bouts of exercise to hold engagement, which sounded very, very interesting and exciting. But I suppose big differences between the size of the organization, as even if it's a one person, it's a challenge with changing content, holding engagement. Whereas if you have a much bigger organization, then those things tend to be easier, maybe to the point Neil was making earlier,
Okay, thanks, Brendan. And I see Catherine Holt making the point that, of course, the parallel process we're experiencing here this is what organizations are facing as their employees work hybrid. So there's learning for us here as coaches as well as people in the coach training space. So thanks for highlighting that first, Catherine. I think there's one other group I haven't got to, which is Mary. Curtis kind of represents them. Mary, could you say some more about the challenges your group identified, the top two ones there?
I suppose we were a mixture of people in terms of what we did, but I think the challenge of COVID was the fact that we needed to be more creative and nimble and more agile in terms of everything that we did. So there was a lot of teaming and learning on the job. And now there is almost not a nervousness, but there's just a sense of unease because you're going back to coach again in person or teaching in person. And so what are the expectations? Because people have had a completely bizarre experience over the last 18 months. So how are they going to turn up? How are you going to turn up? How is the relationship going to be? So I think it's a voyage into the unknown, into something that we had known very well. Yeah. So I don't know if anybody else from the group wants to contribute, but I felt that perhaps they were the two challenges.
And we actually had one cohort that had everything virtually until the very last workshop. And the anxiety of coaching face-to-face was really interesting. It was their first time in a year coaching somebody ever face-to-face. And as you said, Mary, that would have been a presumption on us. What was also interesting with that particular group, they had done 13 days virtually. And maybe to Neil's point, there was a lot of sharing, but it was also really interesting. They knew a lot about each other. They'd coached, we had done a lot of sharing and vulnerability. And yet something like, well, how tall is Michael? Or I didn't know Anne had that commute. It almost like the physical became really important, even though Michael may have shared some really personal things in the program. So I don't know if that, has anybody else ever experienced that almost there was a different level of knowing. One level, we knew each other at almost a psychological level, but we hadn't yet known each other at a physical level, which I never knew was an important factor.
That really resonates with me, because I'm in a group with somebody who talked about her children being born as adults, because she was 6 foot and her husband was 6'4". And of course, we were just seeing her face. And it really threw me, because then I thought, God, when I meet her, she's going to be, 6 inches or 4 inches taller than me. It just really, so I think that whole physical, and the other thing that we talked about was when you are with someone physically, it's what Pam says, it's what's that breath? Why are you doing this? It's that whole, you're sitting this way, your head is this way, you've done something with your hands. You're missing a huge amount of the physical manifestation of what's going on.
Thanks, Mary. And some lovely sharing in the chat around some of the technology. So use of Slack or WhatsApp, or even the sharing of an app that helps block out some of those background noises we experience. So thank you all. Why don't we change gears a bit, if that's okay? And we're going to look at the other side of this equation. So our next round of inquiry is very much looking at then, and some of you have already started this, but what were some of the benefits that may have been experienced in delivering coach training completely virtually? So if I'm going to put you into different groups this time, and again, give you 20 minutes and ask you again to come back with your 2 key contributions. But as either a participant, and may appeal to our introverts who maybe had a much nicer experience being remote, who knows, or as a tutor, or I could do it in my pajamas, or as a training provider, what have been some of the benefits you've actually got from this and may want to carry on using, whether we stay virtual or go back to hybrid or fully face-to-face. So again, if you want to take a photograph of that slide, you'll be with a new group. So again, a facilitator, brief introductions, let's make some contact, and then some space to share before we start prioritizing and making sure we hear all the voices. There you go. I'm going to open the rooms and enjoy your conversation. Go meet some new nice people. Hi, everybody. Welcome back from your second World Cafe conversation. So again, could I invite the facilitator of each of those 5 groups to share in chat, what were the top 2 benefits that were shared of delivering the coaching programs virtually? So Neil's already put in the word trade-off. So we'll come and explore that a bit more in a second. Felicity talking about it's allowed actually programs that maybe weren't so multicultural to be more global and invite a wider audience. Okay, very good. What else could you share with us by chat? What were the 2 key benefits that your group came up with? Just while we're doing that, Neil, trade-off, what came up in your group about that trade-off? What was that? What did that word capture?
Well, I think I put that together from both, even just looking at the 2 questions, because it seems that everything which is the advantage on one side, then you have to trade off something on the other side. There were key benefits, obviously, to online in some aspects, and one of those things which came up in our group was even the environmental considerations as well, of less travel, carbon footprint, which takes us out of coaching specifically, but is a contribution, I think, that we have of saving the environment with all these air miles and travel and so on. So I think that is a huge benefit. But what we're trading off with that then is the human connection of being together and having that other specialness that happens when we are together in a group. And interculturally, I mean, our group is hugely intercultural, and it's one of the modules that we do is specifically intercultural. And we managed to do that online, but it's beautiful when it happens in person, when we have the diversity in the room rather than, spread all over the world. So trade off.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Neil. Felicity, can I call out one of the things your group has shared is easier to share vulnerabilities? Was there any particular examples of that? Because in one way, and maybe to Neil's point, the trade-offs we talk about, we're missing maybe the contact and the relational, and yet we're hearing that maybe for some it was easier to be vulnerable. Where did that come from in your conversation?
Yeah, actually, it came from me. So there you go. But no, look, just because I had the experience, and I share this of, as you know, the online first in terms of as a participant, and then I had the experience of the physical learning in person. So I could compare very clearly, and I think we talked in the group just about the difference that I personally experienced a much more ease of being able to show up within Zoom versus in person. It wasn't that it was tremendously difficult. It was just, it felt different, and it felt a little bit more challenging actually sometimes. And one of the other, I think it was Anne that shared with us that she had a client that talked to her in terms of a coaching client, and how they shared with her that they felt a lot easier showing their own vulnerabilities with her on Zoom, that if it was in person, that it would have been more difficult. So there's something about, I suppose, how we just show up right in person versus Zoom, and what maybe Zoom can support people, and share, and they can share better. So
okay. Can I build on that? Anybody else got any views on that? Have you experienced your own sense of vulnerability changing, or seen others? Is that I guess in the heart of coaching, we're looking for people to open up and be vulnerable appropriately. Does what Felicity and her group is sharing resonate with others, or any experiences of that?
I would share that, but I would say I will use Neil's word of trade-off.
Right.
I definitely feel that sometimes to be at home, you feel a bit more safer because you're in an environment. But again, it all depends on your circumstances. I remember at the very start of the pandemic, we were 4 adults at home. And for me, it was actually quite difficult to have my own space. So when I had a coaching program at the time, I remember on the first day, I was on my chair in my bedroom. I wasn't feeling very comfortable.
Right. So sharing a house with other adults.
And that you learn, I managed to get the desk. But you need to try the space. It doesn't come naturally. Yeah. And I think that's that's a trade-off. So I do share. I agree. There was definitely sometimes more safety, but it's not necessarily there. It's sometimes you need to be creative.
Okay, thanks, Pierre. And I definitely heard some people say that they were able to be vulnerable and not have to deal with the consequences of going for lunch together or being rescued, or people over checking in with them. There was a sense of, I shared, now I can disengage, right? But that has its trade-offs as well. Michael, can I go to your group? You talk about using participants' environment. Can you say a bit more about that? What's the learning behind that?
Well, the idea of human connection. So it's, as opposed to checking in with what's your opinion, it's basically looking at all our backgrounds here and saying, okay, I noticed there's a picture behind you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's so meaningful for you about that? And immediately the participant is no longer sharing an opinion. They're sharing something about themselves that reflects their values, so that you're able to tap into something that lights them up. So they're building on their strengths. They're sharing something that allows us to connect, because as visual learners in a visual medium, largely we can relate to that type of activity.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And then I'm looking at Catherine Coster, your group, Greater Networking, Skills Development, Technology. Would you like to say a bit more about what those benefits were?
So one of the things was networking, like much greater opportunity to network for us as facilitators, but also for everybody within the group. And one of our comments was, how can we bring that going forward, like as the world emerges from COVID? How do we keep some of those that we have built up during the time. In terms of lots of different skills development, both in terms of how do you use Zoom down to tools that you can use in like Menti or annotating whiteboards, etc. So just the use of visual tools as facilitators, that's great for enhancing people's understanding and memory. We also were all jointly very happy with less travel, both for ourselves and for our participants, and the time that we were giving it up. Peter made a good comment about, it's cheaper. You don't have to invest in accommodation and meals and that sort of thing. Obviously, with the side effect of how does that impact the human relationships. But to be honest, there were just so many topics coming up. It was really hard to say what are the top 2 or 3.
Okay.
But yeah, lots of benefits.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Anybody else want to jump in just before we wrap up this piece? We've got a few minutes left, but any other benefits that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to share with this group that you experienced either as a provider or a facilitator or a participant?
I found for me that if I was on site, I would have to block out that time, that whole week. I wouldn't be able to do anything else except that. We had a 10-day online event, and I was still able to travel to the UK, reconnect with my family, spend a month and a half there, and just relocate where I was because I could do the facilitation from wherever I was. So being able to be remote wherever you are in the world, not being stuck in one place, that was quite significant for me this year.
Okay, thanks for that. I see Catherine sharing with us some information on liberating structures. If I could share, as a faculty, one of our learnings actually was we got a lot better at doing pre-work videos. And it almost changed what we taught. We would have done, on a 3-day face-to-face workshop, there would have been a bit of teaching and then discussion and then practice, whereas we almost put the teaching into the videos and could kind of almost expect people to be ready to jump into discussions a bit quicker because we had shortened the days. And what we also began to hear feedback on was people found it a useful learning mechanism to go back and rewatch the videos or rewatch demos. So I think as a faculty, we over the last year have built up a suite of videos either on content or demos that we're now still using now that we're back face to face. We're still using that as pre-work, and it improved our learning impact because people could go back and rewatch those things. So that was one of our big learnings. On a very sad level, as I get older and more confused, the joy of also not having to remember names anymore was a significant but small feature that I have struggled with since being back face to face, trying to make sure I can remember all the names because I don't have the tag anymore. So we've got a few minutes left. I've got one last question that I would like us to contemplate and share via chat. And that's this question of, so what are the lessons that we could share with the wider community? We are recording this. This video will be available to others. We will continue the conversation and we'll be in touch about doing that. I think there's learning here for so many more people than just ourselves. If we could use chat, what would be your one key learning? Either you came with it already or you've picked it up through our conversation or have become more aware of it. But if there's one lesson we could offer the wider coaching community in terms of coach training virtually, what would be that lesson? So I invite you to exercise your fingers one last time. I'll stop sharing the screen. And yeah, what is that one lesson you think we should be sharing with the wider community? So Michael's saying, give your participants a voice and give them multiple breaks. So again, to Neil's thing of you can't just translate face-to-face timings to virtual. Thanks, Michael. What else is jumping up as a key lesson from our co-inquiry today? Pierre calling out that the benefit of staying hybrid in the future, so that maybe we won't be going back to fully face-to-face. There is benefits for being online and on site, which is a nice hybrid model. And again, I'm conscious of Catherine Holt's observation for us all is these are the very same things our corporate clients will be facing about how they go about doing their ways of working as well. Elizabeth, thanks so much. You have to leave, okay? And thanks for the conversation. Peter, talking about using the best from both worlds. So in a way, this has been a bit of a false dichotomy I've offered us, which is just looking at virtual, where I guess we're all hoping we can have a more blended operation. So Neil talking about learning new skills like recording videos. Lenka talking about access to top world trends for affordable prices. So yes, it's going to be interesting. Will the cost of coach training delivery change based on this, or will we go back to a more expensive face-to-face model? Brendan talking about making sure the online content is stimulating and that it balances materials and relationships. So that trade-off. Claudia talking about watch out for the assumptions, and again around language, culture, references, infrastructure. I'm getting all emotional just as I read that, Claudia. Sorry, something just caught there. Karen talking about the opportunity to get a more global perspective. Pierre talking about diversity. Felicity saying embrace the new opportunities in creating new energy and virtual engagement. And Michael talking about have multiple backup exercises and models at your disposal. And use those few minutes when you can, Michael, I guess, to do and prep that. Great. Catherine talking about continued using questions all the time to keep their brains engaged. Okay, so the lecturing definitely doesn't work virtually. It disengages. Very good. Great. Okay, and Margarita talking about the opportunity to learn and embrace new challenges and boost the networking. So again, it widens out the world that we've been engaging with. So Claudia referencing, we've already, I hear you say, we've got a lot of doing in our world. So how do we make sure the virtual world is lots of being as well? We don't need to add in more doing. And Michael giving me some feedback to take Zoom tutorials. Thanks for that, Michael. And Catherine pointing us to some nice resources. And even this Catherine's done this a few times for us, pointing us and sharing resources online. That's not something we could always do in a classroom where it wouldn't feel quite the same. Okay, I'm conscious that for once in my life, I'm ahead of schedule. So I'm going to grasp this opportunity and give you back 4 minutes to your morning, your afternoon, your evening. I really appreciate the dialogue. It's given me lots of food for thought in terms of as a training provider myself, what we should be keeping and doing more of. Thank you for your sharing and for the observations. We will be sharing the recording, and hopefully I look forward to seeing you again in some future conversations. Keep well and safe, and yeah, have a good evening, day, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, Colm. Brilliant.
All the best, everybody.
Thank you, Colm.
Thank you, Colm.